Hello everybody and welcome to another video. I feel a bit funny about this episode of the Q&A because my god there are so many good questions and I feel like I've missed a bazillion of them, but I've done it the fair way. I went to the first people to leave questions, those who got their early words in, and kind of went in order there. So if you did ask a question that you think was pretty good this episode or last episode and it didn't appear here, there is still a chance that it will because I'm going to look back here later. So anyway, one thing I wanted to mention before we go in, last week's Q&A did bring up the idea of adding taunt to classes that do not currently have access to taunt, or more specifically, which specializations come in the game are going to be taunting ones. I said, I don't think the ranger necessarily is going to get one. It doesn't seem to have much synergy with druid. Well, a few people did point out, actually, and I think this is a cool thought, that their pets may indeed get taunt. Taunt is kind of the perfect thing for pet and particularly like AI type stuff, because it's kind of forcing enemies, both in PvP and PvE, I suppose, to fight your pet, which we don't really see too much of just yet. I don't think we're going to have any insanely long duration taunts in Guild Wars 2. It depends, though, especially with how condition duration is going to affect things. But that was something I totally missed, and I think is absolutely a really valuable idea. I was also thinking on Twitter the other day about the idea of specializations giving stealth to classes that don't currently have it. The idea of like a stealthy necromancer, guardian, elementalist, I guess ranger to an extent. I know they get the longbow stealth, but still, it's kind of also crazy to me. It's going to be very curious how specializations affect the game. Anyway, so let's get on to the questions. The first one comes from Lemidrian, who says, "How are you today?" I'm very well, thank you very much. I just had a wonderful Chinese takeaway for dinner, and I was so shocked when I saw this from the first question. I was like, oh, someone just asked me how I was. Thanks very much. I hope you're doing well as well. All right, the first real question is from Monkey Breath, who says, how do you feel about the idea of fighting two dragons at the same time? This comes up a lot. I'm in two minds on this particular idea. Number one, and one of the primary things to me is mechanically, how is this going to be represented in the expansion? I guess if this is the idea. Are we talking about just the boss fight itself? Because in that case, ArenaNet have yet to prove to us they can do really, really, really amazing boss fights. Honestly, even though there have been a lot of improvements to boss fights, and especially like with Triple Trouble and Tequatl as it was originally balanced, they showed they can do pretty damn good boss fights. But in terms of like how Zaitan went, in terms of how bosses have always been in the living world, I found them really lackluster. Even those big iconic fights against the Shadow of the Dragon we fought in Season 2, they bored me. They really did. It was just, okay, dodge a bunch of stuff or do some really mundane thing until you put him into a DPS phase and then DPS him. I got kind of bored of that stuff very quick. So if we were to see Morgemoth take some kind of same fight angle as those battles did in the personal story and in the living world, namely, I don't know, would it really be that exciting if we were fighting two dragons at once? I don't think so. Then of course we have the idea as well of how well can they implement that story-wise. I think again, the personal story, this franchise was at its height of storytelling in my opinion during Nightfall's campaign. That was a long time ago, and Guild Wars 2's personal story in the living world still haven't kind of attained that level for me, and so this is a really cool subject. Two dragons at once, this could be totally badass. Can they pull it off though in the dialogue? Can they pull it off in the way we see the world be affected by this fight between two dragons at once? Can they pull it off in the characters we meet and the people that we lose and how everyone treats this situation? Again, I have my doubts, so I don't know. This is one of those things where I feel like they have a really cool potential story and I'm almost scared to see them do it because I don't actually have that much confidence they can do it super well, I'm sad to say. However, there is the other angle, the other half of my mind that is like, yeah, let's do it. A, because it's badass, and I totally foresee this being a thing at some point. But most importantly, this would accelerate the plot beyond the Elder Dragons, who, at the end of the day, I still find myself pretty hard to be interested in. If we do get to have two Elder Dragons fight one another at the same time, well, that knocks two of them off the list, and we get to deal with the fallout of dealing with the Elder Dragons, appointing our own guys, and perhaps, you know, finally going to some of the other continents we've never even seen before, but also places like Alona and Cantha, and, you know, find some villains, some great big bad guys that are, you know, real characters to us and are born from reasonable places, and we can really dive into them. That's what excites me most, just getting away from the Elder Dragons. You kill them off quicker. So yeah, that's pretty much my views on it, and we'll see how Heart of Thorns does and how much they can wow us, both in terms of how it feels to fight an Elder Dragon in the battle itself and the whole lead up and the way that the story itself feels as we go to it, and then we'll come back to this idea. Camrat Halem says, Now that we have our first expansion, do you think that the chance to get Cantha back is higher? And we are seeing more Tengu with the expansion, at least in PvP and World vs. World. Are they hinting at the Tengu for Living World, or even the next expansion? I do think that because this expansion is adding the Revenant and rounding out the professions, the idea of getting new races and them being on the table, as Arena would like to say, is very, very high for the expansions following it. It's kind of like, alright, this one we get the profession. I don't think we'll see any more new professions come into Guild Wars 2 after this. I think we're going to have 3 light, 3 medium, 3 heavy forevermore. But future expansions will start to add more races for us. I really think that's a really good setup that they've given themselves. And in terms of giving us more profession-style stuff, I believe that that's where the specialization system will come in. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But the idea is expansions after Heart of Thorns, they give us a new race, plus a bunch of new specializations, perhaps, unless they give it to us in the interim periods, like during Living World. So maybe we'll get Tengu for the next expansion, particularly on the idea of Cantha and stuff. My excitement for that content has waned, and as has my desire to play a Tengu. I must be honest, you can only be excited about it for so long, I say, and I don't know, now I'm just kind of finding it a little bit more of a boring idea, and that thrill has kind of died away. It's probably because with every day that passes, I feel further and more distant from Guild Wars 1, and it was back in Guild Wars 1 that I originally grew to love the Tengu, and they just get further and further away, I suppose. Also, obviously, the big excitement of the giant wall and exploring Caledon Forest is also further from my mind now, is even when I'm playing Guild Wars 2, it's not like I spend all my time around there, it's not like I'm leveling it, it's not like I'm seeing that wall for the first time every time. So, yeah, that has faded away a bit. What I'd like to see a lot more now, for the next expansion, is I want to see it be much more Charr-centric. See, what we've got with Heart of Thorns is ArenaNet added a new race, a very unique race to this franchise, to this universe, the Sylvari, at launch of Guild Wars 2, and the first expansion is... It's not the be-all and end-all that you play as Sylvari, but it's very much focused on them, right? Like, there's a lot of plot to do with them. They're going to be at the front, and you can really feel it's very Sylvari-influenced. I like the idea of expansions after Heart of Thorns, also kind of having that weighting on the various races. And yes, many people may like the Sylvari now, and many people may say, oh, you know, the Sylvari are uniquely Guild Wars, they're this special race that they invented. But actually, do you know what? To me, that's the Charr. The Charr are the awesome, special, unique race that you barely see in other games. And yes, their archetype obviously exists, but so does the Sylvari archetype exist within other MMOs. The Charr are the badass ones. The Charr have got a very special place in my heart. Has dangerous damn enemies from the first game that we can now play in this one, and I am very excited by the idea of the expansion after Heart of Thorns not being about Cantha, not being about Tengu, but being about the Charr, about seeing the Ash Legion homelands and the Blood Legion homelands, and really getting into the nitty-gritty of the war machine. And maybe the Charr themselves have some sort of identity crisis. Maybe we do get some better closure on the fate of the Flame Legion. This would be really cool to me, and so that's what I'm most excited about now. And actually, as I read this question here from Camrat, I kind of realised, oh, my views on what I want the next expansion to be have changed. It is no longer Cantha, it's no longer Tengu, it's Charr, and hopefully we see that. Next question is from Zelda Dude 6, who says, what are your opinions on mounts? Not necessarily flying mounts, but ground mounts, either purely cosmetic or actually functional. Personally, I'd love to be riding on Moa around the place. This is a huge topic. I don't talk about that much. Actually, for a long time, I haven't talked about mounts. I'd like to get my opinion on them quite bluntly out there here. So, my opinion on mounts is... I don't care. I actually don't care. I don't think they would destroy the game. I'm not against... A lot of people are against mounts because they think it's some, oh, you're just competing for EP, no, it's just another thing for showing off, oh, we don't need that, whatever. I like that stuff. I appreciate the value of cosmetic-based things that we could show off to one another. And hey, if there's another thing, another element of our character that gets added to the game that we can customize and feel good about, look good with, or maybe even is difficult to get, so we get that other, like, element to it, that PvE sports element to it, that's also kind of cool to me. I think that could add something to the game. At the same time, though, I mean, they're mounts. They mechanically have very, very little meaning in all of Guild Wars 2. I am a player who's in favour of having far less waypoints, but that's so that we spend more time exploring the world and taking in the vistas and stuff. And so if the idea would be reduce a ton of waypoints and then also add mounts that make us move quickly, is that really that much better? I suppose it is a little bit better, but I just don't care that much, really. I've played other MMOs where there are mounts there, and they're just this cool little thing. You know, a lot of people say they'll live or die to see mounts come in the game. You know, oh, I'm not coming back to Guild Wars 2 until there are mounts there. But honestly, what are you going to do? You're going to get a mount, you're going to ride it around for a little while, and then you're going to realize, oh, this didn't actually affect the gameplay that much. It doesn't mean much for Guild Wars 2, and go on waypointing around everywhere again. So I just don't care. I'm not against them, but I'm not particularly for them either. I wouldn't be very offended if ArenaNet put them in. I wouldn't be saying, oh, they shouldn't have spent resources on this. But at the same time, I wouldn't be doing backflips up mountains to declare my love for the game and how much better it's got. They're like on the same level for me as like capes are, really. And that's all I have to say. Daragama Kami says, with Heart of Maguma, they're going with map verticality and 3 different biomes. So what do you think they're going to do with another expansion to make maps interesting? Because I don't see how, for example, the Crystal Desert could be so vertical as a jungle. Interesting idea. I think, really, they're doing 2 things with the maps for Heart of Thorns. Number 1, they are, yes, doing the biome thing, and I think they probably drew inspiration from this biome idea from Guild Wars 1's Maguma, where there were 2 very distinct biomes, and they were trying to play with verticality, I feel like, in that region at Prophecies. But obviously, the engine was far, far, far more limited. The idea of exploring a cave underneath something above, no, it was not something we saw very often at all in that game. And so, yeah, I think they took this, and then they tried to make it a big thing for the Maguma jungle in this game. But then the other big thing I think they're doing that ultimately will be the more important element of these maps is the map-wide meta event mechanic. Kind of like how they talked about what we saw in Dry Top, and particularly the Silver Wastes being precursors to like outposts, for example. I think outposts is one of those features that could be huge. I'd love to see a blog post come out on outposts in particular to give us a lot more clarification on just how big and important these things are going to be. But these map-wide meta events, these are what are really going to give the maps lots and lots of flavor, not necessarily the verticality idea. I think if this works with Heart of Thorns, we're going to see that in future expansions too. The Crystal Desert was one of my absolute favorite places in Guild Wars 1, and of all the video game deserts I have ever explored, I think, and this is quite high praise, honestly, that ArenaNet nailed a video game desert better than anyone else did. The amount of variety that was in that desert, the amount of respect they had to the fact that deserts weren't just giant sandy areas with dunes, and that there were tons of different types of deserts in the real world, and that they could reflect many of them. You could have these giant mesas, you could have like the cragged areas, you could have the oasis-y areas, you could have some sandy areas without dunes, you can have them. It was ridiculous. It was so well done that I think they can make it exciting again in Heart of Thorns, without a doubt. In fact, you know, the big theme of Heart of Thorns, these maps, and it's smart what they're doing, is the idea of making them very, very content dense. There's lots of stuff constantly going on, and that's very fitting, especially when you think of like how a jungle would be. A desert is a desert. It's big, it's open, it doesn't have much in it. I actually tend to think that one thing ArenaNet don't respect much of, and maybe this is smart, is that there's a certain beauty in openness, and there's a beauty in emptiness, and especially if you think about the real world, if you think about steppes, if you think about a lot of real world biomes and the way the real world works, there's actually a great deal of emptiness, and that can be very realistic and very calming. Actually, one of my favorite games of all time is Shadow of the Colossus, and in Shadow of the Colossus, half of the exploration and adventure, you're traveling across these vast empty plains, and it doesn't feel boring. It feels majestic and wonderful and beautiful. I do think there's a place for that in Guild Wars 2, and I guess what I'm saying is this beautiful emptiness, maybe they could show us in the Crystal Desert. You know, it doesn't have to be 3 layers of intensely dense content all over the place. Maybe we will just see this immense, vast desert stretching to the horizon, and there we are in our adventure to travel across it, you know? And if they can pull that off in a way that's not boring, again, it's funny, we were just talking about mounts, the segues between these questions have been kind of interesting. If they can find a way to make this not boring, I would actually love to see that, because I think if you really take what makes a desert so wonderful, it is that space, and it is that emptiness, and I wonder how they'd be able to pull that off. Guild Wars 1 at least had that in spades. Half the maps were just nothing except random mobs that wanted to kill you. Nick Q-Man said, first of all, since Morgemoth is a plant, does it need air, water, and sun to perform photosynthesis? I don't think this is a serious question. It's an interesting idea, though. If he doesn't have access to those things, considering he's underground, he probably doesn't have much sunlight. Let's just say magic did it, shall we? And then he also says, on a more serious note, could they possibly add the Season 1 story through fractals? So people who missed the Attack on Lion's Arch and such events could enter fractals and experience them. I really don't think I'd like to see this at all. Like, fractals are good. Someone suggested this story, if it exists, of a Nuhawk and an Itzel coming together and realizing that they can team up. Like, if this is some kind of a cool story, that's like the perfect thing they can do with fractals, you know, small snippets of lore and cool little events and moments. I think what we really want, though, for Season 1 is a cohesive narrative and a cohesive way of playing it. I want to see Season 1 appear there. It should go personal story, Season 1, Season 2, Heart of Thorns, Season 3, Season 4, the Cogs of War, that's the Charr expansion, and so on, right? Like, that's what I would love to see our hero panel eventually be. I don't want to see this appear jumbled and weird and not selectable in order through fractals. Like, fractals are useful for some things, but I definitely don't think for replaying Season 1. What they need to do with Season 1 is find a way to drag and drop everything they did back in the game, alter it so that it doesn't rely on Zergs. So, for example, Scarlet's invasions across the open world, that we should have some way of experiencing this, I would like, without having to rely on, you know, basically the entire player base ferrying around to these weird maps. And lastly, and most importantly, they need to create a framework around all of these missions that actually lead us from point A to point B to point C, because if they were to just drop it in right now, a lot of stuff is missing in the story that was kind of explained when they were releasing it, because it was like, oh, 3 weeks have passed, and we all know 3 weeks have passed because 3 weeks in real life have passed. That's not going to be there when they drag and drop Season 1 back into the game, so they need to add that framework. They've already talked about that before, but as you guys saw in my interview and a little bit, I guess, in Angry Joe's, they actually have no one working on it right now at all, and I guess this will be something for after Heart of Thorns drops. Not ideal at all. The dream for me was Season 1 comes out before Heart of Thorns, and then we have, like, 2 weeks of Super Adventure Box celebration before the expansion. That would have been, like, the dream way to release Heart of Thorns. But, yeah, so this seems to be for after the X-Pack. And it will be more involved than just a bunch of stuff added to Fractals. Not that I don't want Fractals to have some love. They deserve some more Fractals, definitely. Chapnick says, I noticed the Devourers in Guild Wars 1 were a lot bigger than in Guild Wars 2. Any idea why? Is this simply an artistic decision to make them smaller, or is there some type of law for their size change? I actually answered this in the comments last week, but I'll go over it here as well. No, the truth is that in Guild Wars 1, as stuff leveled, the size of them moved up as well. So there was, in particular, like one dinosaur you met on the Tarnished Coast who was like this giant friggin' boss because his level was so high. Guild Wars 2 actually employs a little bit of a similar system, but it only scale stuff up when they become champions and legendaries. That's why you sometimes see some immense, huge-sized Asura. I believe the boss Asura at the just guarding the entrance to COE is like a massive friggin' Asura. There's lots of that kind of stuff going on in Guild Wars 2. But for generic stuff, they've kind of standardized the model size. So they would have decided at some point, alright, how big are Devourers, really? And they will have picked something a little bit smaller, something closer to the Devourers we saw early game in places like Pre-Searing when they were all low level in Guild Wars 1. It's funny, actually, that we even talk about this with Devourers because, no, there's not a law thing pinning their specific size, but through Pre-Searing and then the 2-year wait and then going into Post-Searing in those early days of Guild Wars 1, there actually are a lot of quests talking about the Devourers and the emergence of Plague Devourers and stuff. It's actually kind of cool now. They ended up becoming this epidemic and spreading all over the place. There's a few mobs out there that do have like decent origin stories. The other ones are Flesh Reavers. Flesh Reavers can actually all be traced back to one specific dungeon back in GW1 where they were created, and now they're like all over the damn place in Guild Wars 2. There's a few enemies like that, but not all of them. Again, this is why I would like to see a bestiary come into the game. The next question is from Saint Alphonse, who says, do you think it'll be 3 years after they drop Heart of Thorns for a second expansion? No, I do not. These 3 years we've had to wait can simply explained as being so long because they didn't know how they wanted to treat Guild Wars as a live game. They wanted to innovate. They wanted to do something different, and I can applaud them for that. That's what they tried when they were making Guild Wars 2 in the first place, and boy, they got a lot of success out of trying to break the mold. They thought that they saw the problems with the expansion system, and they thought they could get away from it. Turns out the community, more than anything, though, really understood and wanted expansions. So I think finally they've decided to go, and now that they know, you've seen the devs say this quite a lot in a lot of the press for Heart of Thorns. They say, you know, this expansion isn't just the expansion itself, but it's kind of us finally finding our feet and knowing how we want to service this game, knowing that we want to do the expansion living world kind of flip-flop style. And so I think now they finally have that decided and they know what they want to do. We won't have to wait 3 years again. I think a year and a half is pretty much the sweet spot. I think if we got another expansion every year and a half from now on for Guild Wars 2, the game could do very, very, very well. I would, as a fan, push that back to a year and be like, oh, I'd love a new expansion every year. But, you know, as the realist in me certainly doesn't think that that's going to be very feasible. So, you know, if it's a year and a half for every X-Pack and the X-Pack itself can keep your average player, you know, coming back for at least 9 months or so, think that's actually pretty good. You know, I really think that would be a good system. So that's what I'm expecting. Definitely not 3 years. We got 2 quick questions here. The next one's from Miggy Righty, who says, "Hey WP, when the expansion comes out, do you think it will include a character slot or 2? I actually don't believe it will come with any character slots. I think though that if we buy the collector's edition, we'll probably get 1 character slot. I know if I was over there and I was thinking of how to do it, that's probably how I would handle things. It would be, oh, buy collector's edition for a free slot for your Revenant. Otherwise, you know, you'll be buying it in-game with gems. This isn't Guild Wars 1. They're not giving us 2 professions. They're only giving us 1. And, you know, how easy it is to get new character slots at this point anyway is very different. So, yeah, I think we'll just get 1 for collectors, and that's it. Tyler Srail says, "Not quite sure the source, but I remember it being mentioned that we were going to get mastery points for leveling." And he says, "As you get lots of experience for dungeon running, wouldn't that mean dungeon running far outstrips any other method for getting mastery points?" I can't remember whether they say you get mastery points for leveling, but certainly once you've equipped a mastery track, you have to level up that track with experience. So the experience is relevant for the mastery system, you're absolutely right. And so yeah, it does sound a lot like dungeon running is going to be one of the best, quickest ways of doing it. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm a little concerned because I like the idea of the mastery system allowing me to make progress on stuff and feel like I'm developing my character in many different areas of the world all the time. And I'm concerned obviously that dungeon running, then you could just spam some dungeons for a week and then you'd be done with everything. That would suck so bad. So hopefully they'll monitor this. Maybe they'll change the amount of experience you get from dungeons. At the same time though, I think strong incentive to always be returning to those dungeons is a good idea. Otherwise they have a whole facet of the game that's there on LFG and stuff that no one's just doing, which would also suck. So yeah, it's something to look at. Well, the video's already got pretty long, so I'll leave that there, guys. As I said, I do still have a bunch of other questions. If you'd like to add to the pool, however, do feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you've got anything you'd like to say based on what I've talked about this video, I'd love to read that too. Hope you guys are having a great day, and I will see you next time for another video. Have a good one, everyone.